Since the time of the Cuban nuclear crisis, the world has been more exposed to the possibility of World War III than at any other time since the end of the Cold War. Following its commitment to the One China principle, the United States does not recognize the Taiwanese government. Instead, it only maintains formal political relations with the communist government in Beijing. As a consequence of the policy of strategic ambiguity, the United States has established significant political and economic support for Taiwan and is regarded as Taiwan's most important ally in the international arena. As a result of the policy of the United States in restraining China, this country has done everything in its power to support Taiwan. In this manner, the United States avoids the expansion of Chinese influence in East Asia by isolating from the region as much as possible. However, China has repeatedly presented Taiwan as an inseparable part of China and has warned that if Taiwan were to declare its independence, it would threaten this country with a military attack and it would cut off diplomatic relations with any country that recognized Taiwan as a country. A tough stance was taken by the United States President Joe Biden on China's threats against Taiwan. He ended the policy of strategic ambiguity, which has been in place since the end of the Cold War. Moreover, he announced that the United States will stand by Taiwan if China attacks Taiwan. A possible attack by China on Taiwan, if it takes place, will naturally result in the regional war spreading rapidly throughout Asia, and Japan and Australia will naturally fight China alongside the United States in the early stages of war. The entry of Australia into the war would mean the entry of the Commonwealth of Nations into the war and would open India, Britain, and Canada's feet into the war, and the result would be the entry of NATO into the war. Putin and the generals of the Russian army would completely wrong about the duration of the war in Ukraine. They were completely wrong about the reaction of the people of the country to this war, and they were completely wrong about the reaction of the world to this war. A great deal of stability was shown by the citizens of Ukraine against Russia. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, united all the citizens of his country against Russia. Instead of running away, he shown a firm stand against Russia. With the increasing amount of military aid from the United States and Europe to Ukraine, due to the war in Ukraine, the Russian army failed to achieve many of its military objectives during the war, and now this war is going in favor of Ukraine. Ultimately, if the war were to end in a draw and Russia would leave Ukraine, then the issue of the Crimea would become a very serious problem. Crimea was occupied by Russia in 2014. The action that Ukraine never accepted, and it repeatedly emphasized it severely and the right of be a part of the country. It is clear that as long as Ukraine wins the war, the wave of nationalist sentiment of the Ukrainian people will not tolerate the Russian occupation of Crimea in the future. Zelensky also repeatedly emphasized the importance of the annexation of Crimea by Ukraine at the end of the war. He also considered peaceful negotiations to occur only upon the complete withdrawal of Russia from the entire territory of Ukraine. In this regard, the Ukrainian army entered into Crimea would provoke Russia to declare an all-out war against Ukraine. If Ukraine invades Crimea, Russia is likely to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Joe Biden the United States President seriously criticized Russia's actions in the early stages of the war. In his speech, he also gave a serious warning to the Russians, saying that if they use nuclear weapons, there will be a very strong response from the United States in return. The Russian economy is currently facing economic sanctions due to the sale of oil to India and China, which has allowed the country to survive these sanctions. As a consequence, economic sanctions cannot be used against Russia if they use nuclear weapons in the future. If a Russian nuclear attack occurs on Ukraine in the future, then the most likely scenario is that the United States will use a nuclear weapons of the same level as the Russian nuclear weapons. This scenario implies that the United States, NATO, and the European Union have all entered the war in Ukraine on a formal level. With the join of Sweden and Finland to NATO, the extent of NATO's border with Russia in Europe will reach the highest level. If NATO starts a war with Russia, this country will be attacked from different sides. In contrast, Russia will also use its unconventional weapons. There's no doubt that North Korea is an unwelcome neighbor to South Korea and has a history of attacking the South Korean people. Due to its nuclear weapons, North Korea has managed to become one of the biggest military powers in East Asia. But having many economic problems, the country is staying away from the international system and has been unable to take part in it. The North Korean government has terrible relations not just with South Korea, but also with some of the countries in its neighborhood, such as Japan, and they have repeatedly threatened Japan's air and sea borders, in addition to South Korea. Meanwhile, North Korea has a special relations with China and has also supported China in its conflicts with Taiwan, as well as Japan. The country has run the police force between them as well. As for the economy of North Korea, it's also highly dependent on China, even though they have many problems as well. In case of war between North Korea and South Korea, the United States will be fighting alongside South Korea. If such a war ever occurs, it is also possible that the Chinese army, just as during the Korean War, will enter the battlefield in support of North Korea, which occurred during the Korean War. There are reasons to believe that the expansion of the war between North Korea and South Korea could be one of the reasons for North Korea's attack on Japan. Moreover, China is likely to use the opportunity of Japanese army getting involved with North Korea to fight with Japan over the ownership of the islands located in East China Sea, to take the advantage of Japanese army involvement with North Korea. In the meantime, there's a good time for the Taiwan battle, and China can attack Taiwan if the United States get involved in South Korea and destroy the ring of pro-United States forces in East Asia. An attack on Taiwan would increase the likelihood of Australia entering the war. In this way, the war will gradually spread throughout East Asia, and the presence of the United States in the war will provide the basis for the entry of Western and Eastern countries allied to the United States in the war. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the establishment of a unipolar system in the world, it seems that the world having only one superpower would not face a war on a global scale. There is no other countries in the world that can challenge the United States. But right now, the United States is facing with serious challenges like Russia and China in the world.